whole prosecution theory that John O'Keefe fell backwards, and the hit by car theory. He helped them to try to support it. But Ed, you
I have to respectfully disagree with you there. Not once during his testimony did he mention being hit by a car. And he said his fall was from gravity, all right? Falling with gravity, nothing to suggest that the car hit him. They can intimate that, but his testimony doesn't say a car. They haven't brought out a crash yet.
So as we were discussing, Dr. Wolf, you said this is a classic fall backwards. Is there anything about the pattern of that laceration that would suggest that there was a ridge or a line type edge that caused that wound?
Not necessarily.
And have you seen, in your experience, similar types of lacerations and breaks caused by falling on hard ground?
Yes, you can see that both in the occipital region. You can see it if patients fall on the forehead. The skin tears, they're still bridging, and then they get bruises.
Some of your work was in Minnesota?
Correct.
Was it a colder part of Minnesota?
Very cold part of Minnesota. It's Minneapolis.
I'm sorry. Did you often see these type of injuries there?
Yes. I mean, we took care of a trauma center, Hennepin County. Very frequently, patients that are drunk fall down on ice sidewalks and could develop lacerations in their head, epidurals, which are blood clots above the dura because they fracture a bone in the temporal area and they can get a bleed from a fractured artery. And it happens when people are shoveling snow and have a heart attack and fall backwards. So there are various ways that people fall, resulting in head injuries and lacerations to their forehead or to different areas of their head.
Can somebody suffer this type of injury simply by falling backwards?
Absolutely.
When you explained that the brain upon impact then shifts forward and hits the front of the skull, is there a medical term for that process?
Well, the medical term is a coup contre coup injury. So the coup is when you first hit. In this case, it was the back of the head, as summarized by the laceration in the back of the head, and the contusions that the pathologist and the ME found in the back of the brain. And then the brain shifts forward, and as it's traveling at a certain velocity, because it's thrust forward on the floor of the base of the skull, it's getting bumped, and it's getting, again, you can think of it as a hammer hitting a thumb. It's getting black and blue in the areas that are sharpest.
Can this type of injury, the coup contre coup, and what you see in the review of your files, could this type of injury happen from an attack by a weapon, like a bat or a hammer?
Well, he did not have a depressed skull fracture. So any focal hit like that would more likely than not have caused a depressed skull fracture. Blunt trauma, the way he had, the assumption, would cause the coup contre coup without a depressed skull fracture. I mean, the forces, depending on how hard they are, can generate fracture lines all the way to the anterior fossa. So you can have fractures along the lateral temporal area. You can have fractures along the orbital roof. The orbital roof is very thin, and so those forces can go all the way to that area.
Did you see any sign of orbital fractures in Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, he had both the ME and the pictures taken, and the neuropathologist mentioned fractures of the orbital roof.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how those fractures occurred?
From the trauma.
Could you just explain a little bit how that would happen?
Well, as he fell backwards and he struck his head, it was clearly at a very high speed generated by the gravity. The bone, depending on the quality of his bone, the density, then generated forces. There's a certain amount of lateral give, and then you get a linear force going forward. It drives all the way up the clivus and forward into the anterior fossa where his orbital roofs lay. And this is why people like this get what they call raccoon's eyes. The brain is a soft substance. You could literally put your finger through the brain. We often operate on people fully awake. The brain couldn't possibly cause a fracture. The fracture was caused by the forces generated through that clivus, that middle bone in the middle of his base of the skull.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not the brain in any way could have caused these orbital fractures?
The answer is absolutely not. It's impossible to know whether he became immediately unconscious, but his injuries were very substantial. And it's more probable than not that at some point he quickly became unconscious and was unable to do functional activities.
What does functional activities mean?
The ability to, get himself up and about would be one of the functional activities. The ability to call for help would be a very significant cortical function. And that's why I was talking about, that there's a variation on a theme from a simple concussion to a severe concussion like this.
He kept going back to that the theory of the prosecution of that John O'Keefe, from the force of he didn't say hit by a car, but he said from the force of his fall, and he
said gravity.
But the prosecutor kept trying to get him to say what he wanted him to say, and he didn't.
He didn't say it,
which was good.
If a person does not have functional abilities because they are rendered unconscious, does their body, could it still move?
Yes, this is the interesting thing about our brain. So the cortex, which is the top portion of your brain, can get separated from your brainstem functionally. And what happens then is that your body is not acting autonomically, meaning vegetative. So why does that happen? We think it's because as we were a caveman, and if a caveman became unconscious, as an animal came up to eat it, the animal would touch it. Well, you have these automatic movements. One of them is called decorticating, which is where you draw your arms like this and you throw your feet out. And then a worse neurological situation is when you decerebrate. Now you push your arms out along with your legs. And that would scare off an animal. So we think that over time, genetically, this is what happened to our brains in order to create these. But those kind of movements are not thought processes. In other words, your brain is not telling you, oh, you have pain, go ahead and decorticate or decerebrate. It's an automatic movement in response to pain. And so when you look at the pathology, the autopsy of his brain, you're looking at a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you're looking at a subdural hemorrhage, neither one of them which was huge or would have required surgery, as well as the contusions that I described in his frontal poles, in his temporal poles, and then the original bang, which was in the occipital area. These are all findings that you would see on a CT scan and an MRI scan without requiring an autopsy if he had made it to the emergency room.
I want to take a step back. At the beginning, you said that this laceration on the back of his head was caused by a fall. Could this be caused by a fall landing on hard ground?
Yes, I mean, like I said, it's a classic blunt trauma laceration.
And I wanted to ask you too, before you answer that question out, if John O'Keefe, as the prosecution proposes here, that he was hit by a car and went flying 20, 30 some odd feet, and landed on the front lawn of 34 Fairview, wouldn't there be any of the Lacard's exchange principle hair, dirt from the grass? Because don't forget, there wasn't snow. What did the meteorologist say? You would be able to see cat tracks in the snow or cat paws in the
There
snow?
was just enough snow at that point in time when they were alleging the impact to track a cat. Very little.
He have dirt? Wouldn't he have hair?
Yes, he would have all of that. He would have all of that. And in addition, he would have broken bones in his arms, broken ribs, not from chest compressions, from CPR. He'd have damage to his neck. He'd have damage to his shoulder, the scapula. There would be all kinds of ligament and cartilage damage. There would be damage to his legs, his hip. There would be so much damage to him from taking the impact of that car and being thrown, as Trooper Paul originally said. It's just, that's why the pathologist says he doesn't have any of the injuries consistent with a motor vehicle accident, and why she could not give a manner of death.